We got Fran. I don't see her.
So, for those who missed it, I'm Alex Husted. I'm the chairperson of the board of Philadelphia Stories. I'm here to introduce Mitch Sommers, who will be the moderator of a panel about submitting to magazines and journals. So I'll take no more of your time. Take it away, Mitch.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for all the panelists for being here today in this somewhat unusual setup as the world changes and we try to keep up with changes. My name is Mitch Sommers. I am the former fiction editor for Philadelphia Stories, and the current one is here somewhere. I think Trish is here. Trish, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Yes. Trish is the current fiction editor. I am the fiction editor emeritus, I guess. That sounds better. What I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time today talking about what magazines, what literary magazines and literary journals look for, what we want to see, what we hope to see, what we usually see, what we are terrified we're going to see in some cases. We've got a panel of people that have got a lot of experience in dealing with literary magazines, and starting with Trish Rodriguez, who is, as I said, the now current fiction editor of Philadelphia Stories, doing an excellent job, I might say. She has been there for about a year now. Is it that long? Anyway.
Yeah, it's been going on like a year and a half, 2 years.
Yes, it has.
Yeah,
it flies by. So anyway, so we have Trish here. We have Frances Metzman, who is fiction editor for Schuylkill Valley Journal. We have Nikki Caffier Smith. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Caffier.
Caffier. Okay. Okay. Who is the fiction editor of Cleaver Magazine and also is on the editorial board of Carve Magazine. There's kind of a carving cleaver kind of thing there.
I know.
So. And Donna Talarico, who is the former founder, actually, well, she's not the former founder, she is the founder of Hippocampus Magazine, which is a online literary magazine that is for nonfiction. She is now left that and left the nest, I suppose.
No, no, I didn't.
Involved in some other projects.
No.
Oh, I thought you left. Oh, okay.
No.
Okay, so
no, we just brought on a second editor.
Okay, because I saw you say you were founder but weren't working for them, and I just got confused. So.
Oh no, I am still here.
We're still the editor of Hippocampus. Excellent.
Yes.
Great. All right. So what I'm going to do is ask our panelists to take about 10 minutes and just kind of explain a little about their backgrounds, how they make decisions, how the magazines are put together, what you look for, like I said, what you don't look for, what you want to see more of. So how about we start with you, since I had unceremoniously written you out of your own magazine and as a way of making amends. We'll start with you, Donna.
Yeah, no, that's okay, Mitch. Hippocampus was growing a little bit, and we have a lot of submissions, so we brought on Ray Pagliarolo as our assistant, or as our associate editor. So maybe there was just confusion that she replaced me, but she's joined me.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm with Hippocampus. We are a creative nonfiction magazine, have been around since May 2011 was when our first issue came out. And right now we publish 7 times a year. We're bi-monthly, but we do a contest issue in November, and then we do either a theme or a best of issue in December. So that's why there's like that extra issue at the end. And we're open for submissions from March through December. So we're open for submissions through the rest of this year. So if you have any nonfiction ready to send out, keep us in mind. we have, we're all completely volunteer run, independent magazine, not affiliated with a university or a foundation. We have a volunteer panel of about 30 readers that kind of jump in and out depending on how busy they are, but we have a blind reading process. So everything, like, we don't read your cover letter until after we read your submission, until it makes it to the next level. So, so we try to be open and inclusive to everybody. We publish a lot of people. We publish a lot of people's first story, which is really exciting. As far as what we're looking for, we have a flash section that publishes up to 800 words. And then everything else is in for our essay collection, or essay section, and that's up to 4,000 words. And are you going to go around and ask us questions later, Mitch, or is this the time we should talk about like what our likes and dislikes are?
Why don't we do it that way, and we'll just go. Everybody, take a few minutes and explain
Okay.
how who you are and what you do and those kinds of things, and then we'll all sort of throw it open to the panel as to the more nuts and bolts stuff.
Okay, yeah. So that's the basics, and I'll circle back to other things as people have questions.
Okay, Trish, you're up next. I decided.
You decided.
You're up next.
You've got the power.
Very small power, very, very limited power.
So I'm Trish. I am the fiction editor for Philadelphia Stories. I also am what they call a prose editor at Hippocampus Magazine. So by that means that I read fiction and nonfiction. So I like to play around with a little bit of all the genres. Even I will dabble in some poetry personally. So with respect to Philadelphia Stories, we accept stories, short fiction under 5,000 words. Right now, we're working on our winter issue. And we have a theme of Black Lives Matter. So we're looking for writers, especially of color, to tell that story. So if you know anyone that has a story that is looking to share, please pass the word along. And let's see, what else should I tell about myself? I also write. I love writing short fiction. So I have a lot to say when we come around to me about writing short fiction. So we do accept flash fiction as well as short stories. We do accept also novel excerpts, but I'll admit I'm a little biased. I'm not exactly a fan of novel excerpts. But that's, neither here nor there. If it stands on its own, I'm open to it, but it's a hard sell.
Okay. All right. So, Nikki, how about you telling us a little about yourself and what you do and what you're looking for?
Sure. I'm Nikki. I'm fiction editor at Cleaver, and I've been with Cleaver for only about 10 months now. I started out as an intern and an editorial intern, and now I'm fiction editor. And a little bit more about Cleaver. We are also independent, volunteer run. We publish anything from poetry to creative nonfiction to flash to short stories, and then we also publish art, and we're open to experimental works as well. So it kind of runs the gamut. And so for my part, I edit short stories, generally under 5,000 words. I consider stories above that, but they'd really have to pull their weight for me to consider publishing them. And then I also consider flash fiction under 1,000 words. So Cleaver, the types of things that Cleaver publishes is we publish eclectic stories that are elegantly written with character-driven plots. And we also accept stories that border on the surreal or the speculative, but all of those still center characters at their heart. So not classic science fiction fantasy per se, but it could have those elements as long as the character is the heart of the story. Also, what was I going to say? So I look for writers who are writing about stories that haven't really been given a lot of space or are centering marginalized groups. I am planning a themed issue for next June that would be a call for queer writers or queer submissions specifically focused on queer writers of color. So that being said, I'm a little biased as well. I'm not usually looking for stories that tell like kind of tried stories about maybe like a couple going through a divorce and that's it. And there's no nuance. I like nuanced stories that tell intersectional stories or just are unique in some way. Yeah, so if you have any more questions about that later on in the panel, please ask. I'm happy to elaborate. But that's it for me for now.
Okay, thank you. And Fran, you're on deck now. Come on up.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad we got in cleanly. Although I did send you a little SOS, Mitch, about not being able to get in. So I'm here. I'm Schuylkill Valley Journal's fiction editor. They're out of Manayunk. I choose not necessarily Philadelphia, countrywide, or international if it's in English and it's a good story. That's what I look for, is good stories. I'm a published writer. I've written several books, published many short stories. I started with short stories. That was my initial drive, and then I kind of expanded into novels. My last novel was Cha-Cha Babes of Pelican Way, kind of 60-ish women, age 60-ish. They're not telling, really. And versus millennials, that, you know, we don't have much difference in our needs and wants and futures. We all still have futures. So I'm also on the editorial staff of Tree of Life Books. It's a fairly new, although the publisher had other publishing companies, it's a fairly new, more literary oriented kinds of writing. In Schuylkill Valley Journal, we do a lot of poetry, at least 4 short stories per journal, which comes out twice a year. What I look for, kind of a little old-fashioned. I don't do experimental or magic realism, which I happen to like, but I think people who are submitting really have to understand the structure of writing. So whatever you do, you can't miss by understanding how that works. It's like building a house. You kind of start with the structure, scenes, and you have got to have very realistic dialogue, and, you know, every word moves your story, not especially in short stories. we will do up to about 4,000 words if it's a very good story. Over that, the flash fiction is on Schuylkill Valley's, there's a little extra noise. Oh, good. Okay. Schuylkill Valley has an online edition. They do the short fiction on that. So if you're doing flash fiction, look at Schuylkill Valley Journal's online segment. Make sure your work is flawless, seamless. Once in a while, I will get a story that is so good with flaws, and I will help edit. Editing is something I do in freelance. I teach at Temple's adult school, Temple University's adult school, and I teach techniques of writing, which I do believe in. Once you have the techniques down pat, you can get it online. You know how to do narrative, inner narrative. I like a good balance. Character is extremely important, and just a half a step under that, plot. That could be as subtle as anything, but you can't really throw that ending in. I've read so many stories, yay, it got me a story to publish, and the ending is very self-conscious and kind of just plopped in to get an ending. So watch that. Okay, I've talked enough.
Okay, well, thank you again. I want to throw this open to the panel. We talk sort of generally the kinds of things you look for. Can you talk about your decision process? What all of you do in deciding, yeah, this is something we should publish, or this is not something we should publish? What do you do when there's disagreements amongst the board as to whether something should go or not? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Who's up?
Whoever wishes to be.
I will say.
Why don't you go?
Oh, okay. I will say that your beginning is, your first paragraph is very important. I often, even if I'm not happy with the first paragraph, I will generally continue to read to look for the good elements in the story. Many editors won't get past sometimes your first line, but at least the first paragraph. So pay an awful lot of attention to that so you capture your readers, you know, that they want to make sure the story isn't going to put you into a sleep pattern. So watch your beginning. If you are not published, short story writing is a very good way to get published. Don't worry if they're not paying you, submit anyway. You know, there isn't a whole lot of money, especially in the freestanding journals, which is Schuylkill Valley Journal is one of those. And Don, I think you mentioned yours is too, not associated with the university, which can get subsidies, but I don't know about now. But so I would watch that, and this is a good way to build that resume. Submit, but carefully watch for the glitches in your, read it out loud. That's the best way to do it. And you will hear a lot of flaws, if there are any. You might not have any flaws, but you will hear it if you read it out loud. Okay.
All right. Donna, you have anything to?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about our decision process. We, like I said before, we have a blind reading process, and we use a software platform called Submittable, which a lot of literary magazines do. And what that allows us to do is use that blind process. So our reading panel doesn't see the names, they only see the stories. And we go through and make sure at least each story is read 3 to 5 times by 3 to 5 different people. And the readers vote yes or no. They put comments in there. And what I really like sometimes is when a story has 2 yeses, 2 nos, and 1 maybe. And that's where a lot of the dialogue happens. But for many stories, like we don't really just disagree. I mean, they're just straight yeses or straight nos. We get a lot of those, mostly, you know, on the no side, people agree on that. And then the stories that have yeses, they rise up, and then I'll make the final decisions on them. But I do have some senior readers that will help choose the final stories. If like we try to do about 10 to 14 stories per issue. But almost 2 years ago, Ray came on as our Flash editor. So I do the essays and Ray does the Flash, and she built out a Flash team. So now we have 2 teams. So it's still the same process, but now we have 2 different teams. And that's about it. A lot of times if we don't accept something, but people feel really, you know, that there's great voice or a great story, great potential there, we will invite somebody to do a revision and resubmit it. So we do try to encourage writers where and when we can. Due to volume, we can't give personal feedback to everybody, but for those that are really close, we try to do that.
One of the things that when I was fiction editor, if you get an actual personal note from someone on the editorial board or an editor that says, we didn't publish it, but we really liked it, please send us more stuff. What they really mean is, we liked it, please send us more stuff. I had plenty of times where we would do that. I would tell, well, not plenty, but a few, where we would tell the writer, you know, this is really good stuff. We're not going to take it, but please send us some work. And they don't. So if you get that kind of personal comment, pay attention. So, Trish, any thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of times we'll review a story and it might not be quite there. You know, the ending might not work, or sometimes the middle gets a little, we call it the muddy middle, the story that doesn't quite carry it along. If there's a strong voice, you know, or if we don't jive with the voice, that's not something that you can really fix. But if there's a little something that's off, we might still like the story. So then we will definitely say, hey, send us more stuff. And very rarely do those writers send us more things. Which, I mean, I understand it's hard to pump out a lot of stories, and sometimes our feelings get hurt when we get rejected. Mm-hmm. But some of the things that we, I don't want to say turn us off of a story, but you know, might lead us to saying no, is overwriting. So that overwriting where it just doesn't sound natural, and you know, there's purple prose, just overdone language. You know, it just feels that the writer just like went too far. We're trying to be too writerly rather than just telling a story. And, you know, we actually see that a lot. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
I think it does. It does. Nikki.
Yeah, I can speak. I'm probably going to be parroting a lot of what others have said, but as Donna mentioned, Cleaver also uses Submittable as our platform for reviewing submissions, which means that we also engage in a dialogue between the interns, the editorial board, on each piece. I really agree with what's been said about the beginning. It's just tried and true. The beginning has got to hook you. I personally read every single story that comes through, which I know a lot of people don't do, but I'm a completist, so I kind of can't help it. I read every word. I don't think I think most people do not. And what I often see is that the beginning is just extremely difficult to get through. And if the rest of the story is, even if the rest of the story is wonderful, our readers, our board would decline the story because of that. There are occasions where if the story is something that we're looking for, would fit in the magazine, is really well written, but does have some flaws, or in one case, the ending just wasn't working, the rest of it was wonderful. I reached out to the author and I helped her edit the story to improve the ending, and we published it. So that happens, though it is rare. We have about a 5 to 6% acceptance rate, which actually is a little higher than some. And we publish about 3 to 4 stories per issue. We're quarterly. So sometimes if we're coming up against maybe 6 stories that are really good, could be published, we have to make kind of hard decisions in our discussions about, like, for instance, if there's an option to select whether or not you're a Philadelphia author. We really are trying to represent Philadelphia, which has a strong literary community, but is definitely underrepresented in literary magazines. So if you're a Philadelphia author, that might give you a leg up. These are just hard decisions that we make at the end, depending on your story. But in some cases, we might slate your story for the next issue if we really want to publish it. And then to speak to what Mitch said about getting that, getting feedback where an editor tells you that they really liked your story, but it's just not going to work for the issue, please send more. It's really true. I actually just published an author who has submitted to us a couple of times, really good writer. Their stories just didn't work. And then they just submitted one and it's working. Like, it's great. So we're publishing it, and I'm really glad that they sent more work, because yeah, we don't send those out to everybody. So I guess that's all I'll say about that.
Okay. We do have a chat question here from Robert McCrills, and I'll just read it out and hopefully get some comments on this. Other than not following the guidelines, what is the worst mistake we can make? Any thoughts on any of that?
Not sending to the appropriate magazine or journal for your genre. You know, I would read that very carefully before sending. And you must be an editor who says what they want, they tell you, and don't send it if you don't have that genre. They're not interested.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say for Hippocampus, and this was kind of already brought up a little bit, but for nonfiction, it's usually the ending. The ending a lot of times feels tacked on, or this is the lesson I learned. Like they tell us why they wrote it. So that's one of the biggest mistakes we see in nonfiction, or not necessarily mistakes, but something that we don't really like. And the same thing with the beginning. It's, here's what I'm going to tell you about, rather than just telling it. So sometimes there's that summary at the beginning, almost like as if it was a newspaper article. You want to put something in the lead and then tell the story. So I would say the beginning and endings. And then also, again, this is solely nonfiction. A lot of people write nonfiction to get through difficult times, and sometimes stories could end up reading more like a journal entry, and this is something just for me, versus I want to share this with the world. And everybody has a unique story, but how can I make this a little bit universal, or make other people care about this topic or about this person's character, this subject. So yeah, so I would say make us feel something, and don't tell us what you're going to write, and don't tell us what we're going to learn from it, let the reader figure that out itself. Let the story tell it. Let the story tell that.
I have something as well.
Yeah.
Oh, just that for my part, I find that something that is probably one of the worst mistakes that a writer can make for me is just sudden things added into the story for pure shock value with no leading up to it, like a sudden unexplained death at the end, or just anything that was not alluded to, no foreshadowing, no character develop, or like a sudden character shift that the character as it's developed would never do. That for me is really jarring. Going along with that, also POV shift, sudden point of view shifts. Say a story is told in close third person, focusing on one character, and then all of a sudden there's two paragraphs that are inside of another character's head. That's another thing that really throws me out of the story. So watch out for that. Sudden tense changes are the same. If you're writing in present tense and then it switches to past tense for a few paragraphs and then back, that's another thing to watch out for. And I've made that mistake in my own writing as well. It can be hard to catch. And then I also won't publish anything that is racist, xenophobic, homophobic, ableist, violent for no reason, or overly graphically violent. I won't publish that. So.
Can I add one thing?
Please.
Another mistake that I find a little off-putting is you have to remember action equals reaction. Sometimes a writer will have an action, whether it's psychological, whatever, it doesn't matter, or overt, physical, and they won't put the reaction. And so when I will say, you introduced an idea here, and then you just went off, oh, I put it at the end, it's in another chapter if you're writing a novel. You can't do that. It's one of those things that I look for, and it just doesn't work. Even if your reaction is one sentence or 3 words, action equals reaction, not later. And that will stop me from reading.
Thanks. Okay, we have another chat question. Edward Wazolak, I'm probably destroying that name, to everyone. There are so many magazines out there that publish short stories, and sometimes I have trouble getting a real feel for what they really want. I'm fairly new to writing, about 5 years. So do you have any tips or suggestions for understanding what a magazine is really looking for genre-wise?
Read the magazine. If guidelines are not clear, you'll just have to read the magazine, a couple of issues, and you'll get a clear idea of what they're looking for.
There's a really great tool out there. I don't know if anybody has heard of it, Duotrope. Does anybody use that? They have a free trial for 7 days, so I encourage anybody to go through and do it. And then it's $5 a month after that, which I think it's worth it. It's a big database of literary magazines, and it has by genre. And you can type in, so say you've read Splitlet magazine. You can go look at that magazine, and it has like a little algorithm at the bottom, and it says, if someone was published here, or sorry, here's some places people were published here were also published. Or here's places that people submitted here, they also submitted here. So you can kind of like follow that train and go down a rabbit hole, but that's a good way to discover new literary magazines. You should still go to the magazine and check it out before you send it and read their guidelines. But what Duotrope also does is it has like the acceptance rate, things that they're looking for. They have editor interviews. it's a really great resource. So you could spend like a couple hours doing some good research there and really take a step farther of where you want to send your stuff. So that's my recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. Just this is not as comprehensive, but one thing that I've found helps also is that if you're reading a literary magazine and you happen upon a story that you really love or seems like it fits with your own style, take a look at that author's bio and see where they've been published. Not as comprehensive as Duotrope, but it's a good fix if you can't afford it. That's all. Yeah.
One of the things that always used to surprise me when I was fiction editor for Philadelphia Stories is people that would send something that had no connection to Philadelphia, no connection to Philadelphia area generally. They weren't from there. My personal favorite was a woman who submitted a story and she lived in Brooklyn. And I was like trying to find out because it was sort of on the fence on the story. And as it turned out, she didn't have a connection to Philadelphia, had never lived in Philadelphia. But as she did tell me, my grandson goes to Penn. So that was not quite the connection that I had in mind. So look at the guidelines. I mean, I know that sounds trite and kind of obvious, but look at the guidelines. They do matter. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. Any other thoughts on this this topic? Anyone else? Okay.
I put this in the chat, but I just did what Nikki did. My somebody I went to my MFA program asked me where he should submit short stories, and focusing on nonfiction, I really wasn't sure. And so my friend Tyler Barton is like a prolific short story and flash fiction writer, and I just said, here, look at Tyler's bio. So I echo what Nikki said. It's just, it sounds so simple, but yet it's so valuable what you can find from that.
Yeah, we published Tyler's stuff too, by the way. I'm one of the last issues I edited. How has moving to present time and present pandemic, how have the events since about mid-March of our lives this year affected you as writers, as editors, as people trying to put together a magazine? Any thoughts on that?
I'll jump in on that. So our submissions have been down, you know, with regard to both magazines that I work with. A lot of stories have kind of tacked on the pandemic rather than, you know, exploring the true nature of how the pandemic has maybe affected that character. Personally, I've had a harder time focusing and reading and writing and just generally being creative and being positive. So I think that's, I'm not the optimistic person that I usually am during this pandemic. I can definitely say that.
Yeah, understood. Any other thoughts on that?
We haven't had a drop, any significant kind of drop in stories. I got the feeling people, because they're stuck in, are writing a bit more, especially in nice weather when you would ordinarily go out and run on the streets. But I've been a little more prolific, but a lot of the time, though, has been spent learning electronics because I'm very low tech. You know, all the Zooms and the different rooms, and, you know, it's like, let's see, share screen. I had to really learn these, and it was a little tough for me. So I found that that's taken a good bit of time, but maybe it's going to roll better from now on. Let's hope. because we're in it for a longer stay. But I think I've been a little more industrious in my own writings.
Have you seen much? You mentioned about the tacked on pandemic lines. Have you seen much influence of the pandemic in people's work? I mean, either expressly or, you know, maybe not directly, but you can sense it's sort of pandemic influenced. Have any of you seen any of that? I see Nikki. Yeah.
Yeah, I have. I've seen a lot. Most of the stories that not most of the stories that come through, but most of the stories that deal with the pandemic in some way are very blatant, blatantly exploring pandemic life, which I will say I don't find often works. I think we're still in the thick of it, so it doesn't feel so retrospective, or I just don't feel like there's anything really emotionally to glean from it, because we are still fully in the thick of it. The pieces that I've noticed work the best are the ones that don't outright address the pandemic itself, but more so set up the story in a way that isolates its characters in some way. It may not even be a pandemic, but explore themes of isolation and loneliness and all of these things that we're feeling currently in this moment, and exploring them through a different lens rather than the COVID pandemic specifically. That's just my 2 cents on that.
To go off of what Nikki just said for the pandemic for Hippocampus, since we are nonfiction, our turnaround time is 3 to 4 months because we plan several issues ahead, and people are sending us COVID-related essays, and they'll put in brackets timely essay, and we're not that type of publication, so we would suggest them to maybe somebody who does like the first person essays, more of like a journalism newsy magazine outlet for those instant responses. And I think Nikki made a good point too. Even if we were to open up one of those essays and read them, it's like writing a grief essay right after somebody dies. I think the story will be better served a little after it. So I think journal during this, but your masterpiece from it might come a little later after you reflect. But to your earlier question, Mitch, about how has it affected us, with what Trish said about not feeling as positive as usual, me too. We also run a small press, and we had some deadlines, and our production schedule timelines just got all out of whack. I personally wasn't there, not just the pandemic, but with all the things that are happening. And I think it's really important to remember that there are people, hardworking people behind these magazines. We're not just an editor on the other side is submittable, but when we get those emails like, you say 3 to 4 months, it's been 5 months, get back to me. And we do say you can follow up with us, but it's just understand that if you don't hear back during a national pandemic, it's not personal. We're all going through some things, and that's true every day. We're all volunteers behind the scenes doing things, and we're doing this because we love it. So sometimes the pressure of the expectations can get on you, and I think the pandemic elevated that. Sorry to go off there, but geez, I haven't said that out loud to anybody yet.
We've all thought it, I think. But are there any stories or essays that you've passed on that you think maybe you were wrong to pass on, and in retrospect you might have published it again? Published it?
No.
Okay. All right.
Only if it's really close and you make suggestions, and the piece comes back. I would only do it in that case. If it's really too much editing, you know, I don't know that it would ever really get done. So if it's touches here and there, fixing glitches, I don't mind, and I will revisit that story, but not that often. That's why you have to really make sure it's so good, perfect, really read over and over and over again. That's so important. I can't stress that enough. Don't chase your editor away.
And I would add to that
sorry.
Sorry, I was jumping on what you were saying. I would add that have somebody else read your story before you submit it.
Yeah.
You know, so often, you know, we get things that feel very first drafty. And it's very common with our first draft to feel like, okay, it's there. I've got it as good as it's going to be. This is ready. And it's not until we get that second set of eyes on it to realize that there's some illogic in the plot, something is inconsistent with the character, or we have talking heads with dialogue, that we really need that, or, you know, we've done a homonym mix-up. We really need that second set of eyes to catch those things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even if you can get into a small writers group, and then make sure you trust the people, and then you can listen to their advice. And if you get a tip, if you get a good rejection, which means somebody wrote something on it, you know, I don't like your ending, I'm not going to publish this. If they give you a tip, take it seriously. It doesn't often happen.
I would agree with that. It all goes back to when you get the really good rejection and they say, please, for the love of God, submit again, your stuff's great, and you don't do it.
Yeah, right, right. That's bad.
Yeah.
That was an opening. You had a toe in the door. Not a foot, but a toe.
Just
Yeah.
to go off of that too. So I'm representing Cleaver, but I also work for Carve Magazine. And one thing that we do is we offer feedback to every single author that submits. And there's even a portion of the magazine where people can write back to Carve if we rejected a piece and it was accepted elsewhere. And that's featured in the magazine. So even if your piece is rejected at one magazine and you're given feedback for it, take that feedback as Fran and Trish said, but and maybe submit it elsewhere. Maybe it just wasn't right for that magazine, but it would be right for a different magazine. So don't give up on your pieces. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just maybe means it wasn't working for this particular publication.
Absolutely, I agree. It's very, there's a lot of subjectivity of what appeals. So you have to, that's it, just keep them flowing.
Okay. All right. Any other audience questions? If you've got any, you can put them in chat right now. We still got a few minutes left, about 9-10 minutes left.
Maybe we could put a link to all of our magazines in there too. I'll do that. Oh, there's a squirrel outside my window.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm in the basement and there's
Is the squirrel actually here, or is it on Zoom? The squirrel doesn't.
No, it's outside the window here. I'm in a basement office and it's up there.
Okay.
what does it have a submission? Is it trying to submit a story, your squirrel?
Actually, let me ask you, for those of you who, I think both you, Trish, and you, Nikki, are in other magazines that you help edit on, how does that work? Do you have, the two magazines that different, that you have to do a mental shift? How does that work for you, being editorially involved in more than one publication?
I can speak to that. So Cleaver and Carve are different but similar. So it's kind of like a Venn diagram. So Carve publishes pretty much, their slogan is honest fiction. So they publish extremely character-driven stories. They are modeled after or inspired by the stories of Raymond Carver, who was a realistic fiction short story genius. And so I see Cleaver publishes some of that as well, but we also sometimes border on the eclectic, weird, surreal kind of stories that are also character driven. So I've actually seen the same stories come through both magazines. And in one particular case, I rejected it for Carve, I accepted it for Cleaver, and I worked with the author to edit it a bit because it did need a bit of editing, but it was better suited to Cleaver Magazine. So there is a bit of a shift that I have to make when I'm reading for Cleaver versus when I'm reading for Carve. Yeah, but but what doesn't work for one may work for another, like as I said last. So
yeah, Philadelphia Stories is more regional, and Type House is more open to genre fiction, even though we accept genre fiction with Philadelphia Stories. Type House definitely has more of a history of publishing genre fiction, in addition to literary fiction. When I'm reading between the two, I definitely have to do a mental shift. So I have to tell myself, okay, this is this kind of writing, turn your brain this way. So I'm kind of regimented in my day. So I have times when I edit, and then times when I work on revisions of my own work, and then times when I do my own writing. And I found that I have to separate the times when I do my own writing compared to reading submissions, because of that brain shift. I don't know how you all feel about that, but, definitely it's more the analytical, critical mind. And then when I'm writing my own work, I need to be a little more freewheeling.
How much editing are you willing to, and this is for everyone on the panel, how much editing are you willing to do if you like a story, but it's not quite there? How much revision will you do before you say, no, I'm not going to publish this?
I guess it depends on the voice. Sometimes the voice will carry a story, but it has to be an extremely good voice. I tried to keep my edits to a minimum. If there's too much, you're going to have a really tough time communicating all that needs to be done. Many authors are not, some have turned me down. This is my story. Tough luck, lady. Decision. But I will do a minimal to a fair amount, depending on the voice and the way it's written and the clarity. So it's very, very erratic. It's really dependent. I have to really like that story.
For Hippocampus, we try to take stories that maybe just need some light copy editing versus revision. Since we our shorter turnaround time, and we publish more often, we have less lead time for each issue and to work with each author. So we just also do really minimal edits. If it's something that we really believe in, like I said before, we'll do the revise and resubmit, and we invite them to resubmit it. And we have a separate category. We have a $3 submission fee. So we invite them to go, we give them a special link so they don't have to pay again if we invite them to write back. So that's usually our process for a bigger revision. We'll kind of ask them to do it and then show it to us again.
Any, I'm sorry, did I cut someone off?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that I will ask an author to revise a story if first of all the writing has to be really good. It has to really make me feel, really make me think. So in that sense, it needs to be pretty much there. So I'll revise pretty much based on if the ending isn't working or if the beginning is a bit difficult to get through, because I need to know that if I'm working with an author, they can write, they can, you know, and it's pretty amazing with just like a few suggestions what a writer can bring back. So I really believe in revision. I tend to revise stories if it's a story that is not generally told, or if it's like a story that is more marginalized, usually. So, but I like revising. If a story really has a lot of potential, is well written, makes me feel, I think it's worth it.
Yeah. We're coming up on the end of our panel discussion here. Does anyone have any thoughts? Anyone who's watching this have anything that they want to ask us? Please put it in chat now, and we'll take a crack at it. Any closing thoughts from all of you?
Revise, revise, revise before you send. Yeah, you have to really, really, you know, I mean, I've done novels 25, 30 times. I mean, full novels. So, you know, you just have to keep revising. There's a point where you stop. You might have a couple of glitches, but clean. I mean, as clean as possible before you send.
Yeah, my final advice is echoing what Trish said earlier about also share your work with the reading group, get outside feedback with people who aren't your friends and family and don't already love you.
Or a spouse or a partner who doesn't want to insult you.
I would like to add that don't sweat the cover letter too much. You don't need to summarize your work in your cover letter or write every single publication that you've had. But also in your cover letter, don't insult the editor by like addressing it to like someone else, you know, dear sir, when it's, you know, a woman, you know, just a very simple cover letter of a short third-person bio is really all you need, and not, you know, all 350 publications that you've had.
And also I'd say I see a lot of authors will kind of pitch their short story as you would in a novel query. You don't need to do that with a short story. The short story will speak for itself. No need to go over what it's about. And yeah, just keep it really boring. Word count, your name, a bio, the title of the story. Thank you. That's it.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, Donna, I see you did actually answer that one. We had one comment. What is the average average fees for submission. And Donna, looks like you said about three to five. Does that sound about what everyone else's experience is in terms of submission fees, or something you don't charge fees?
We don't charge fees.
Okay.
Schuylkill Valley Journal does not charge fees.
Cleaver does not either.
Yeah, Philadelphia Stories doesn't charge either.
We're the lone wolf here.
Well, $3 isn't excessive. So.
Yeah, and we have a waiver too. And every December, it's also submission fee free. And I've seen some journals offer where it's free, but they'll offer a paid version for like quicker turnaround time or for feedback, which I think is fair. That way people will spend a little more time on it.
Okay. All right. I think that takes us to the hour. And I think that wraps things up. I want to thank all of you for being here and sharing your knowledge of short stories and essays and how to get them published. So I appreciate all of your comments. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye. All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next year.
Hopefully in real time.
Hopefully, let's hope.
All right.
I'm really hoping. I don't know who to ask, but somewhere out there, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she'll do it for us.
She's trying.
She is.
Everybody take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Alex, do you want me to leave and come back in? I see you're still recording.
Yeah.